Hello Varlets. Today we'll be looking at the Zealot's talent tree and breaking down their ability mechanics, as well as some other nodes of interest in great detail. Compared to the Psyker and Veteran, Zealots are a lot more simpler to understand. While that may be the case, I'm sure you'll find certain bits of information here useful to your own gameplay. Starting with the Stunstorm Grenade augment, we first need to know what the base stun grenade does. Your base stun grenade has a blast radius of 6.5 meters, and anything caught in the blast will be stunned for 6 seconds and take a little bit of damage over time. Taking the Stunstorm augment increases your blast radius by 50% to around 10.5 meters. In simple math, this increases the effective area that you can now cover with your grenade by 160%, which is more than 2.5 times. This augment allows you to lock down entire rooms and keep loads of enemies disabled, making it a very powerful tool to take control of the battlefield, to either open up priority targets like bulwarks and crushers, or to get a revive off. Remember to use your nades to save a game. You don't get bonus anything for bringing them back to the Morningstar with you, dead or alive. Next, we have the Immolation Grenade. These grenades allow you to blanket the floor in flames, burning any enemies that are standing within. The Immolation Grenade can cover a 4.5 meter radius patch of ground in fire, which lasts for 13 seconds. Standing in these flames does not deal friendly fire, but given they look so similar to fire barrels and bomber nades, it's best just to avoid standing in any flames altogether, lest you accidentally go down standing in the wrong one. Enemies caught in the burning field will take a random amount of damage which can either tick up or down. I have no idea how to do the math for this because it's so strange to try and calculate. While the tooltip does say it's best against unarmored enemies, it's generally decent against most armor types with the exception of Carapace. Enemies stop taking damage once they leave the flames as well. Enemies who aren't caught in the fire upon your grenade going off will attempt to run around the fire to get to you. This means you can sort of funnel enemy movement by closing off pathways and narrowing the number of places a horde or melee enemies can reach you. So even if your Immolation Grenade doesn't do any damage, using it to redirect enemy movement can have tactical merit as well. The keyword here is attempt. Sometimes they will absolutely not care that there is holy fire in the way and push through to reach you in the shortest way possible. This is especially the case for elites. More often than not, they'll just walk over anyway to get at you. Keep that in mind and keep an eye out. Lastly, we have Blades of Faith. These are the throwing knives that Zealots can equip and is probably one of the coolest additions to their kit with this update. Let's start with their damage. For this, we're going to need the help of a table. As you can see, Blades of Faith does a respectable amount of body shot damage, almost like a revolver shot against some armor types. But where it can really bring the pain is when you land those weak spot hits. The weak spot multiplier on them more than doubles the damage you deal, allowing you to easily reach the breakpoints on many enemies, especially against specials. The only enemies you shouldn't bother throwing your blades at are unyielding enemy types, which includes Reapers, Bulwarks, and all the monsters, as well as Carapace. And yes, like the Assail from the Psyker, Blades of Faith can crit as well, but from my limited testing, it appears the multiplier isn't as high as landing weak spots, so practice landing those headshots. Other notes for Blades of Faith include, they have no damage fall off. If you can land them, they will still do full damage no matter the distance. However, they do have travel time and fly in an arc. This means there is a maximum distance they can go before landing into the ground. Picking up ammo reloads knives. Small ammo gives you 2 knives, big ammo gives you 6, and presumably an ammo crate reloads all of them. You can throw knives without switching out weapons, allowing for a very fluid combat style. This is important to note because of the last point. Blades of Faith also inherits the damage perks from the weapons you have out at the time, so if you have a weapon which has plus flak damage for example, your throwing knives will deal additional damage to flak armor as well. Now we'll look at the first of our combat abilities, Fury of the Faithful. This is an augment to your base Chastise the Wicked charge, which grants you 20% attack speed for 10 seconds. Simple and straightforward, as is the other augment node of Redoubled Zeal, which gives you 2 charges to work with. Where the mechanics of this ability lies is in understanding its base form. Without any enemies, activating Chastise the Wicked travels 8 meters. By holding down the ability button, you can pinpoint target an enemy from 20 meters and travel to them, increasing your charge distance to 20 meters up from 8. You'll know you've marked an enemy because they will be glowing orange. During your charge, you are able to fire your guns and wind up for a heavy attack. This is especially useful for the Thunderhammers. A hidden mechanic of your charge, which all veteran Zealots should know, is that it provides a buff that degrades the armor value of all enemies by 1 for 4 seconds. This means it treats something like Carapace armor as if it was flak, allowing you to damage it with weapons that would normally struggle to do so. This is a very important mechanic to know about your Chastise the Wicked. Moving on, let's take a look at Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude. Activating this ability whips out a relic that releases pulses of energy every 0.8 seconds. While you are channeling this ability, all allies in coherency become stun immune and invulnerable. Each pulse also restores 45% toughness to allies in coherency, and if they are at full toughness already, each pulse instead provides a 20 toughness overshield that stacks up to 100. This ability is an incredible team support ability that can turn the tide of battle in an instant. Stun immunity and invulnerability means for the brief moments you are channeling, your allies can go ham and take risky plays to push the offensive, as long as they are in coherency with you, or pick up down teammates and bring them back into the fight at no risk. The base ability pulses 7 times, with the first pulse occurring 0.8 seconds after you pull out the relic. This means the total channel time of the ability is 5.6 seconds. During this time, you are not immune to damage, but damage won't cancel your channel either. Sprinting, interacting with something like buttons or picking up downed allies will stop the ability early. Activating the ability again also cancels it early. The bonus toughness overshield also makes it so your allies and yourself are more resilient against both ranged and melee damage after your channeling, since enemies now will need to chip through more toughness before reaching your health. To further enhance Chorus of Spiritual Fortitude, this combat ability has 3 augments to increase what it can bring to the table. The first is Banishing Light, and is easily the most impactful of the 3 and should be mandatory if you are going down this path. Banishing Light allows each pulse to stagger and suppress enemies, increasing in range with every pulse. Notes on Banishing Light include: the stagger pulse starts at 5 meters and very quickly jumps to 10 meters at max. It will reach 10 meters by the second or third pulse. The closer enemies are to you, the stronger the stagger, so a good way to create space is to activate Chorus and shove enemies in the direction you more or less want them to go to. And most importantly, this augment allows you to stagger crushers, open up bulwarks, and even push around monsters. The only enemy you will struggle to push around are maulers for some reason. They are very resilient and will barely move an inch, but you can still stagger them long enough to prevent them from attacking. Going back to pushing monsters around, taking Banishing Light gives your kit something very rare, a consistent way to knock monsters back and so prevent them from attacking your team. What's more, if the map allows for it, you can very strategically and gracefully push a monster down to their death, even a demon host. Truly a blessed augment to have. The other 2 augments are nice to have but not necessary by any measure. Holy Cause provides you and your allies a 25% toughness damage reduction boost for 10 seconds after channeling 5 pulses. This augment adds even more resilience to your toughness overshield and makes you and your team very tanky for a short while. Excelsior's Call provides you and your allies with a 15% damage bonus for 10 seconds after channeling 5 pulses. This is an alright damage buff to help boost your team's damage output during and after your channel to take better advantage of the fact that Banishing Light is keeping enemies near you stagger locked. The final ability we're looking at is Shroudfield. In many ways, this ability is similar to the Veteran's Infiltrate, but offers a great deal more offensive bonuses at the expense of being on a shorter duration. Activating Shroudfield immediately cloaks you for 3 seconds. In this time, you have a 20% movement speed bonus, and your next attack deals 100% backstab damage, 100% finesse damage, this is weak spot and critical damage, and is a 100% guaranteed critical hit. If you just read the tooltip, you'll probably think that's a lot of damage, but the most important damage value from Shroudfield is the additional 100% backstab damage. Because of how the math works, the difference between getting a backstab hit and not is more than double. So if you really want to maximize the damage from Shroudfield, you should at the very least go for backstabs. Notice I didn't say melee backstabs. Shroudfield's bonuses also apply to range damage as well. What's more, it also affects Blades of Faith. I'll leave it to your imagination on the kinds of plays and builds you can make with this knowledge. The augments for Shroudfield include Mastercrafted Shroudfield, which extends its duration to 6 seconds, giving you more time to reposition and find opportunities for backstabs. Invigorating Revelation restores 40% of your toughness over 5 seconds on leaving stealth and gives you a 20% damage reduction for 5 seconds. This is more of a defensive augment to buy you a little more resilience if the situation turns for the worse, or a little more staying power if you decide to remain in fight after revealing yourself. Perfectionist gives you an additional 50% more finesse damage on top of another 100% backstab damage at the cost of doubling your Shroudfield's cooldown. This is a high risk, high reward sort of augment, giving your next backstab attack a tremendous amount of damage. The penalty of course is pretty steep. Doubling your cooldown means overall less Shroudfield uptime within the mission, but this can be mitigated with other talent nodes like Pious Cutthroat, as well as combat ability regen perks on your Curios. Lastly, we have our Keystone nodes. Overall, the Zealot Keystone nodes are very simple and straightforward as well. Blazing Piety gives you plus 15% critical chance for 8 seconds whenever you enter Fury. You can trigger Fury when 25 enemies have died within 25 meters. Anyone can kill enemies to help build up your Fury, and this Keystone essentially acts like a free 15% crit for doing nothing special. Blazing Piety's Keystone support nodes are split into the defensive support side and the offensive side. On the defensive side, you have Stalwart, where triggering Fury restores 50% of your toughness. This is not that useful of an augment, seeing that if Fury is being triggered, it means you are either in combat and killing things and therefore can regen toughness from your other talents, or your teammate has killed ambient enemies and so triggering your Fury when you don't need it to, thereby mostly wasting the toughness regen. The other augment is a supportive one. Infectious Zeal provides allies in currency with 33% of the critical chance bonus from Blazing Piety. In other words, when you trigger Blazing Piety, your nearby allies gain a 5% critical bonus. I don't know about you, but a conditional 5% crit bonus for the team doesn't seem very useful in the grand scheme of things. Now, on the offensive side of the tree, we have Fury Rising. This node allows critical hits to also count up towards triggering Fury. In contrast to the defensive nodes we just went over, this one is insanely good. It makes Blazing Piety so easy to trigger that you don't even have to kill things. Being able to have crits count towards triggering Blazing Piety means something like Scourge works wonderfully well with this augment node. This also means you can trigger Blazing Piety while fighting monsters and get an eventual crit boost to take them down even faster. The final offensive augment node for Blazing Piety is Righteous Warrior. It simply adds an additional 10% chance to Blazing Piety, bringing it up to a total of 25%. I don't think I need to explain how getting a free 10% crit chance, on top of the benefits of Fury Rising, works incredibly well together. The offensive side of the Blazing Piety augment nodes can make most weapons into crit viable weapons, and most crit-centric weapons into crit machines. This makes triggering Invocation of Death very easy and allows you to rapidly recharge your abilities. Lots of potential here in this Keystone node for build crafting. The second Keystone ability is Martyrdom. Each missing wound grants you 8% melee damage, up to 9 wounds max. For those of you who are unsure, a wound is a single chunk of health. Each wound represents how many times you can go down before you finally die. It's important to note that the tooltip is a little misleading. Reading it, it says each missing wound, implying that the wound is gone either from going down or being corrupted. What it actually means is for each missing wound's worth of health. So taking regular damage that would reduce more than one chunk's worth of health will provide you with a Martyrdom damage buff. Knowing this makes the Keystone better than it initially came across, which was a little too restrictive. Anyway, as you go up in difficulty, you naturally have less wounds to start with. This means Martyrdom actually loses a little bit of its maximum potential as well. On Damnation, where you start with 2 wounds naturally, taking Faith's Fortitude and loading up with wounds gives you up to 7 wounds. And because you need at least 1 wound left to be alive, you have 6 wounds worth of potential for Martyrdom. This gives you at best a 48% melee damage boost on your last legs, still a very sizable buff. If we include the augment modifiers like I Shall Not Fall, which grants 5% toughness damage reduction per wound missing, and Maniac, which provides 4% attack speed per wound missing, we have a total of 48% melee damage, 24% attack speed, and 30% toughness damage reduction. These buffs turn you into a whirlwind of melee destruction, and practically anything that has the misfortune of coming near you is going to end up very dead. Going down this Keystone's path is a pretty niche one that isn't going to be to everyone's playstyle. I personally don't like the low health builds simply because even when you build into it fully with all manner of damage resistance and play perfectly well, chaos bullshittery can happen in a mission. Backstabbing Flamer or Bomber will shred all your toughness. An exploding barrel will damage your health directly. Having less health in general means your capacity to make mistakes or take risky plays is also lowered. There's definitely an interesting balance I can think of that warrants more exploration. Moving on. The last Keystone node for the Zealot is Momentum. Moving grants you Momentum, which stacks up to 20 times. When you hit an enemy, you will spend all stacks of Momentum and gain 1% melee and range attack speed, as well as 1% damage per stack. This buff lasts for 8 seconds. So the first thing I wanted to test was what counts as moving. Sprinting accumulates stacks the fastest and will be the primary way of you building momentum. Walking is sprinting but slower, and will accumulate stacks a little slower as well. Dodging and sliding also accumulate stacks, so staying agile doesn't hamper you in building up momentum. The funniest thing about this is that jumping in place accumulates stacks as well, but at a pretty slow rate. Unfortunately, crouching does not accumulate stacks. Sorry lads, teabagging in place won't get you any momentum. Now, as far as stacks goes, once you spend your momentum stacks and get the buff, you can still build up momentum and you will hold on to it until the first buff runs out. After that, the next hit will apply the most recent accumulation of momentum stacks. No need to worry about the lower stacks overriding the higher stacks. That being said, this makes momentum not a very strong buff for prolonged combat where you don't do a lot of moving. But this can be solved with its augment nodes. Retributor's stance allows you to restore 2% toughness for each stack of momentum that you spent, giving you up to 40% toughness. It's an okay defensive node. But what makes this keystone a lot better and more consistent in the value it can provide is Inebriate's Poise, or in other words, Drunken Stance. This node gives you 3 stacks of momentum upon successfully dodging an enemy attack. This makes momentum more effective while engaged in combat, even when you're not running around. Although you probably won't be building the full 20 stacks of momentum while in combat before the first buff expires, you can very reasonably build 10 stacks or so, giving you about half of the bonuses from the keystone. That concludes the main abilities of the Zealot's talent tree. There are a few other node mechanics which might be of interest to you. The Master's Retribution is a pretty mediocre talent all things considered, but it has a singular unique function. It can knock off Poxhounds in the event you get pounced. Think of this as a failsafe just in case there's no one else to save you talent. Swift Certainty is an excellent perk that increases your survivability against ranged enemies. Normally, you'd need to have stamina while sprinting to avoid gunfire, but this perk makes it so that even if you are without any stamina, you are still technically dodging gunfire. A really great talent to have if you are playing a very fast playstyle. Lastly, Thy Wrath Be Swift allows you to never get interrupted by enemy attacks. This means enemies can't break your heavy attack's wind-up animation, making using slower weapons like the Thunder Hammer or the Eviscerator, or weapons with the Trust Blessing, a lot smoother to use. Something to consider if you are struggling with getting your heavy attacks off. Alright, this brings us to the end of this video. With the Zealot's talent tree complete, it means there's only one left to do now. Ogrin boys, you're up next. While doing the work to build this video, I've already thought of at least 3 unique builds for my Zealots out there, and I hope to be sharing them with you very soon. Stay tuned for that. I hope this video has been informative for you and that you enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.